let's just move on. I just want to say a few words before the next speaker comes. London Business School, or London School of Economics, ranked Nigeria as 7th out of 178 countries to adopt the Bitcoin cryptocurrency, which relies on the blockchain technology. And it doesn't surprise me at all, because we've seen the issues with the foreign currency in Nigeria. So it's of no surprise that London School of Economics is saying that we will likely be one of the early adopters of the Bitcoin, which is a digital currency that uses blockchain technology. So our next speaker, TUNDE LADIPO, who is the head of partnership at Stella, which operates Stella Network, an open source, globally distributed financial platform that connects financial institutions, payment systems, and people. We'll be talking more and just helping us to understand this blockchain technology and how we can easily start using it. Indeed, some of my clients and a number of corporate organizations are beginning to see how they can adopt this currency in one way or the other to solve their financial or FX problems. So please join me in welcoming Tunde Ladipo to come and talk about blockchain technology. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Yeah, it's good to be back home. I used to work for Autoanderson and now KPMG. So, Tunde Ladipo, I work for Stella. I advise Stella. And Stella is a not-for-profit. Sorry. Okay. Stella is a not-for-profit, and it was founded in 2014. And the goal of Stella is to actually build worldwide financial inclusion and access. We've been asked a number of times, why not for profit? Even today, I got the question, why not for profit? The key reason for it being not for profit is for global adoption. Because if you can imagine the internet is actually owned by a company. Would we all adopt it the way we've adopted it? It's the same thing with the Linux, which is adopted. There's a Linux Foundation which manages Linux. So the idea is to actually have worldwide adoption, amongst other things. Now, I'll be talking about 4 main things. The first one is payment challenges. I'm sure most people in this room have had a number of payment challenges. Then I'll talk about blockchain. I'll also talk about the Stella network and also opportunities with the Stella network. Now, first thing about payment challenges. One specifically, sorry. Someone help? Okay. One specifically is international payments. This is a huge industry. It's a 300 trillion industry. But there are lots of issues around it. And typically, when you are going to transfer money, say from Nigeria to probably Japan or China, you typically rely on what is called the corresponding banking model, where you have loops. You first go from one bank to yet another bank, which serves as the corresponding bank, and you might actually have a number of these intermediaries in between before you finally get to your destination. Now, what this means is there are a number of issues associated with it. The issues vary from, one, it's that corresponding bank actually then have the access, and you do not have the access, and they thus determine the fees that will be charged. The second thing that you see is, excuse me, okay. The second thing you see is because there are a lot of manual processes in between, you have a lot of errors in this, and it's reported that 1 in 8 transactions actually have errors. That's about 12%. That is really huge in terms of the errors. The other thing is it's quite expensive For low value transactions, you can actually be charged up to 10% or 12% of what you are trying to send, which is significant, especially since it's low value transactions. Then, in terms of speed, imagine having to wait 3 to 5 days for you to send money to your child who is in school in Japan. All these are the issues we currently have in international payments. So how can this be resolved? That's where blockchain actually comes in. And blockchain, just like Boye had talked about, it's quite revolutionary. And I don't know why. It's quite revolutionary, and there's a lot of interest in it right now. Just looking at the numbers, in terms of investments, in just the last 3 years, 1.4 billion has been invested in blockchain technologies, just the last 3 years. Now, in terms of adoption, about 80% of the global banks have one form of trial or use for blockchain at the moment. We are talking about banks like Barclays Bank, we are talking about Santander, we are talking about US Bank. So all these banks have one form or the other use of blockchain that they are experimenting with right now. And that is supposed to get up to 80% by 2017. Then lots of patents have been filed. Over 2,500 patents have been filed on blockchain in just the last 3 years. And we also spoke about countries. A lot of countries are actually adopting the blockchain technology. The Bank of England is actually looking at it. The Federal Reserve Bank is looking at it. So there's a lot of interest in this space at the moment. What I will do next is to look at some of the terms. Bayo has talked about some of the terms, but I'll just give some more detail. Okay, sorry. I thought you could hear me. Can you hear me? Okay, better. Okay, good. For some reason, I can't hear this. So, in terms of the terms, the first thing is there's what is called a digital ledger. Now, digital ledger is a record, a digital record of who owns what and what transactions are being done. And this is actually distributed. So instead of you to have it in a central location, you actually have it distributed in various nodes. Blockchain is just a type of digital ledger. And what makes blockchain unique is that it records its information in blocks. And these blocks are actually chained together. So if you picture it like an Excel book, so you finish with one Excel sheet, you protect it, then you open up the next Excel sheet, you protect it. So at the end of the day, you have a series of Excel sheets making up a book. So that's one way to look at the blockchain. And the beauty of the blockchain is that you can't actually tamper with the information there. Once it's put in there, you can't actually tamper with it. And how the information is actually put in there is what is called consensus. So all the different people in the network would have to come together and say, okay, we agree with this information for it to actually get into the blockchain. Okay. Sorry, I seem to be having some issues. Okay. Technology sometimes fails you. So, yeah. So, can I get... Okay. Okay. So I think it's fine now. Thank you. So I've talked about some of these terms, the consensus. Those are the rules that allow an update to actually take place. So the different nodes in the network have to come together and agree in order for an update to take place. Then we talked about Bitcoin. We mentioned Bitcoin. That's the currency that is used on the network. It doesn't have to be Bitcoin. It can be any other currency. And governments are now looking at it and saying, why can't we also have our own fiat currencies that are digital? There's no reason why they cannot have fiat currencies that are actually digital. So that is being looked at the moment. Now, this is kind of the blockchain. As you can see, you have different nodes there, and you don't need a central body to actually manage things. All the participants in the network can actually contribute and validate a particular transaction. So that's what actually happens. Now, this is how money actually moves in a blockchain. From Bank A, let's use Bank A, it broadcasts onto the blockchain network, and when it's broadcast into the blockchain network, the information is actually put in a block. When it's put in the block, the participants of the network have to actually verify this in the process called consensus. They have to agree that this transaction is actually correct, because you can have transactions that are not correct. Take, for example, somebody wants to make a payment, but he doesn't have money in his account. So clearly that transaction is not going to go, and the participants in the network are going to say, no, this is an invalid transaction. So once that happens, that block is then added to all the other blocks to make that chain, and the Bank B then sees that update and is able to get the credit for the credit that was sent to it. So that's how it happens. Now, there are several applications of blockchain. Boye has mentioned a number of them, but this is a more detailed list of what you can actually use blockchain for. I've talked about the international payment. Trade finance is also a big area where blockchain application is going to be revolutionary. Then also KYC, AML, and a number of other uses of blockchain. Now, talking about Stella, what makes Stella unique? Unlike Bitcoin, where the focus is actually on a currency, in Stella, you actually can use whatever currency you want. You can use Naira, you can use Japanese yen, you can use US dollar. So all that is available on Stella. You're not constrained to a particular currency. Then in terms of speed, it takes 3 to 5 seconds in order for you to get updates wherever in the world you may be. Then in terms of cost, it is extremely cheap. In fact, it is almost free. Because if you look at it, it's 1 cent for 300,000 transactions, so almost free. Then scalability, Stella can do thousands of, even millions of transactions in a second. So it's definitely highly scalable. Then in terms of safety, you do not have to link up with all the participants in the network. You can actually have what is called a quorum and work within your quorum. So quorum of people you trust. You don't have to trust everybody in the network. And finally, this is something that regulators would love. It is very regulatory friendly because it has protocols that check that everything is fine, and regulators can actually plug in to see what's going on. Now, other opportunities on Stella, you've seen this list of selected financial institutions that are connected to Stella, have integrated with Stella at the moment. Now, in terms of geography, Stella is already in 4 continents, and the goal is to actually become a worldwide standard, obviously getting to South America and Australia. That's the only 2 continents that Stella is not in right now. And there is also a build challenge, which is quite exciting for developers. There's a $3 million prize for people who can build apps on Stella at the moment. So I think that's it.
Thank you, Tunde LADIPO. We'll be able to take 1 or 2 questions.
Can you give us examples of banks, either in Nigeria or in Africa in general, that's already connected to Stella?
Well, thank you for the question. In terms of worldwide, there are banks already connected to Stella, but in terms of Africa, we are still speaking with a number of banks to connect to Stella. So worldwide, ICIC is one of the biggest banks in India. It's already connected to Stella. and we're also speaking to a number of banks in the US. In Nigeria, I will not be able to disclose certain names of banks that we've already spoken to, but a number of service providers to banks are already connected to Stella. And their names came up on the screen, like Flutterwave is one of those companies.
We'll just take one more question before we move on to the next.
Thank you, Tunde. My name is Onome Komolafe. I'm from Coronation Merchant Bank. My question is, I understand, the clip where you showed the money moving from the foreigner to the Nigerian, but I don't understand the bit on how the settlement will happen in terms of how would the Nigerian bank get its value.
Okay. Well, thank you. So one way to look at it that will make it pretty easy is, imagine you have this gigantic Excel sheet that everyone is plugged into, right? So at the end of the day, what happens is on that sheet is debit and credit. So yes, we've called it movement. It's not exactly movement in that sense. It's more a case of, since everyone is connected to one thing, you just need to debit one account and credit the other. That's why it can take 3 to 5 seconds to actually do this. Is that clear?
Thank you very much, Tunde. Can we give him a round of applause too?